Agatha, Raisin, and the Troublesome Trifle. A village baking triumph turns bitter when a humiliating trifle becomes the centre of a very public scandal, and a far deadlier secret lurks beneath the custard. Settle in for murder, motive, and meddling in Castle, and tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight, and subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Doris, stop flapping those tickets like a dying pigeon, Agatha snapped as she marched into the Castle WI hall, chin high and confidence higher. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to spoil her moment. Not Doris's fussing, not Gertie Pym's smug sponge, and certainly not the usual Castle mutterings about city ladies trying too hard. Tonight, her troublesome trifle would silence them all. The hall buzzed with the sort of excitement usually reserved for royal visits or discounted jam. Long tables groaned under puddings of every persuasion. Gertie Pym hovered over her sponge with the solemnity of a priest at the altar. Mrs. Blocksby soothed tempers with the skill of a UN envoy, though the wild glint in Gertie's eyes suggested diplomacy had limits. Agatha placed her trifle bowl at the centre table like a crown jewel. The gleaming layers, sherry-soaked sponge, custard, fruit, cream, shimmered under the fluorescent lights. A few women gasped. Good, Agatha thought. They should gasp. Lovely dear, Doris said vaguely, though the top looks poured. Hodge, Agatha muttered, remembering too late the morning scuffle when the cat had decided the cooling sponge was his personal playground. He has no respect for artistry. Before Doris could inquire further, the hall door banged open. Leonard Dacres strode in like a man expecting applause. Tall, overgroomed, and radiating the arrogance of someone who believed custard was a personality trait, he surveyed the WI hall with theatrical distaste. His aftershave arrived a full second before he did. "Ladies," he boomed, "what a charming little scene." Agatha bristled. Nothing good ever followed the word little. Dacres made a slow tour of the tables, pausing at Gertie Pym's sponge. "A relic," he declared, "quite sweet, like something from an elderly aunt who collects buttons." Gertie puffed up like a defensive hen, but Mrs. Blocksby placed a gentle hand on her arm. "He doesn't mean—" "Oh, he does," Gertie hissed. Then Dacres reached Agatha's trifle. He circled it as if assessing a suspicious package. "Ambitious," he said, voice heavy with warning. "Perhaps too ambitious. One wonders how many components were truly handmade." Agatha felt heat crawl up her neck. "Every single one," she snapped. "Of course," he murmured, and the hall tittered. He moved on, pausing only when Doris offered her nut biscuits. He recoiled. "Can't touch the things. I have a serious allergy." The remark was tossed carelessly, but Bill Wong, present as an invited guest, raised an eyebrow. Agatha caught the look. A clue, though she didn't yet know to what. Near the back, Felicity Trent, the elegant newcomer, stood beside a delicate lemon tart. When Dacres reached her, he stopped short. "You," he said softly. Felicity went white. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, nothing," he said brightly, though his smile sharpened. "Just a face from a past restaurant disaster. We mustn't dwell." Felicity's grip tightened on her tart dish. Agatha noted it with sharp curiosity. As if sensing opportunities for further offence, Dacres drifted toward Henry Crisp from the Red Lion. "Your pub," he drawled, "is practically screaming for a makeover. Something modern, something edible." Henry's jaw worked furiously. Agatha made a mental note. Another person quite ready to murder the man with a pudding spoon. Judging began. Dacres performed each sampling with theatrical sighs and muttered critiques. When he finally returned to Agatha's trifle, she folded her arms. This was it. Her triumph. Her vindication. He took a spoonful, let it linger a moment, and then said in the voice of a damning deity, "Store-bought custard." "It isn't!" Agatha cried, outraged enough to feel faint. "Disqualified!" The hall erupted, half gloating, half scandalized. Gertie Pym smirked. Felicity looked faintly apologetic, but only faintly. Dacres handed Felicity the first prize ribbon with a flourish. Delicate, balanced, not overly alcoholic. Agatha's humiliation reached boiling point. "If you weren't a guest," she hissed, "I'd shove that ribbon." "Agatha," Mrs. Blocksby said mildly, "perhaps some tea." "Tea won't help," Agatha growled. "Nothing will help except never seeing that man again." Red herrings bloomed innocently around the room. Gertie's glare promised revenge on anyone who mocked her sponge. Henry Crisp muttered, "Drag my pub anywhere and I'll drag you into a ditch." Felicity trembled at some unspoken history, and Dacres, strutting, sneering, refused every nut-containing dessert with dramatic horror. The evening dissolved into gossip. Agatha stayed only long enough to witness Dacres bragging about a forthcoming TV special on hopeless village cooks. She nearly did throw the trifle at him then. Instead, she gathered her coat, lifted her chin, and declared to the hall, "I shall never enter another WI event as long as I live." The hall pretended not to hear, which meant everyone heard. Doris fluttered at her. "Agatha, dear, don't be silly." "Silly?" Agatha barked. "I'll show you silly. I'm off." She marched to the exit, stepped through the doorway, and nearly collided with Henry Crisp, who muttered, "That man's a menace," before stomping past her. Outside, the air felt cooler, or perhaps that was simply the shock of public humiliation settling in her bones. She strode home with brisk, angry steps, replaying every sneer, every titter, every injustice. Her trifle had been magnificent, a marvel, a masterpiece, and now it was a joke whispered behind hands. When she reached her cottage, Hodge greeted her with a disdainful flick of his tail. "This is all your fault," Agatha informed him. "If you hadn't ruined the sponge—" Hodge padded away, elegantly indifferent. She kicked off her shoes, poured a glass of wine, and muttered to herself until her temper calmed enough to let exhaustion settle. She would forget this evening. She would bury it. She would certainly never see Leonard Dacres again, thank heaven. Back in the WI kitchen, unnoticed amid the chatter and washing up, the remnants of her trifle sat on the counter. The creamy layers sagged slightly under the warmth of the hall, their once proud structure slumping in defeat. Someone in passing nudged the bowl aside. No one paid attention. No one realized anything had been touched. Trouble, however, had already started simmering, quietly, sweetly, and fatally, beneath the custard. In her cottage, Agatha switched off the lamp, sighed, and watched Hodge curl into a contented loaf on the sofa cushion. His quiet snore filled the room with a small domestic peace. She stroked his back and muttered, "At least you don't judge cooking competitions." Hodge stretched, unimpressed, and Agatha felt herself soften despite her wounded pride. Tomorrow would be another battle, another gossip storm. But for now the cottage was warm, Hodge was purring, and the trifle, thankfully out of sight, could cause no more embarrassment, or so she believed. Trifle, Agatha muttered at the mirror, ought to be banned from polite society. Her reflection looked unimpressed. Hodge, sprawled across the dressing table, yawned as if agreeing. She dabbed at her lipstick with the determination of a woman erasing memories. Today she would behave as though last night's humiliation had never happened. The phone rang. Doris's chirpy voice burst down the line. "Agatha, dear, marvellous news. The leftover desserts from the competition are being reused for a thank-you supper at the vicarage. Isn't that sweet?" "It's not sweet," Agatha snapped. "It's recycling." "Well, Mrs. Blocksby said your trifle might get a better audience tonight." Doris added, "Mrs. Blocksby took the bowl over to the vicarage this morning and put it in the kitchen to keep it safe." Agatha paused. A better audience. Something warm and traitorous fluttered in her chest. "Did she?" she said, already softening. "Well, perhaps it deserves one." "Besides," she told herself, "a vicarage supper isn't a WI event. It's only WI women behaving badly in a different building." Doris rushed on. "So, you'll come? 7 sharp. Bring your sparkle." Agatha hung up before Doris could gush further. A supper at the vicarage sounded harmless enough. Besides, she rather liked the idea of Dacres eating his words, preferably along with second helpings of her magnificent creation. The vicarage kitchen that afternoon was a bustling sanctuary of warmth, polished pans, and nervous WI energy. Gertie Pym had installed herself at the centre counter, fussing over her pudding with the reverence of a museum curator. Mrs. Blocksby glided between ovens with calm grace, trying to prevent small culinary skirmishes. Felicity Trent stood near the sink, all graceful posture and elegant lace gloves. "I thought I might help," she said, smiling with soft martyrdom. "Poor Mrs. Blocksby always carries too great a burden." Agatha arched an eyebrow. "Helping or supervising?" Felicity's smile tightened. "Whichever you prefer." A shy cough sounded behind them. Pauline Hurst, the vicar's quiet cousin, held a plate of sliced fruit with apologetic fragility. "Is there anything here with nuts? I only ask because of my allergy. Quite serious, I'm afraid." Gertie sniffed. "No nuts needed for a proper pudding." "That's what you'd think," Agatha murmured, eyeing her trifle bowl. It had been placed neatly at the end of the counter, too neatly. Something about the angle niggled at her. Just then, the kitchen door flew open and Leonard Dacres barged in, radiating disdain. "I've come to inspect tonight's offerings. One cannot risk culinary disaster in a vicarage." Mrs. Blocksby offered a long-suffering smile. "Mr. Dacres, everything is perfectly safe." "Safe?" he scoffed. "I'm concerned with excellence, not safety." He swept past Agatha without a glance and poked at Gertie's sponge. "Still alive, I see." Gertie's eyes glittered dangerously. Henry Crisp arrived with a tray of wine bottles. Before he could set them down, Dacres sneered. "Your pub still serving grey meat, Henry?" Henry stiffened. "Our customers seem content enough." "Content? That's the problem. Rural complacency ruins cuisine." Agatha watched Henry's knuckles whiten around the tray handle. Interesting. Another person pushed to the brink by Dacres's tongue. Martin Bladen followed, clipboard in hand, wearing the permanently anxious expression of a man expecting a lawsuit. Dacres beckoned him with two curling fingers. "Bladen, we must speak later. Those hygiene reports of yours, valuable if strategically placed, but so inconvenient when incomplete." Bladen paled. "Mr. Dacres, I've followed every regulation." "Regulation bores me," Dacres said, cutting him off. "Results matter." Mrs. Blocksby clapped her hands with forced cheer. Perhaps everyone would like some tea. But Agatha had slipped away toward the counter. Something was wrong. She leaned closer to her trifle bowl. The fruit layer seemed slightly disturbed. Not obvious, just unsettled. Then her eyes caught the culprit, a tin of mixed nuts, open, sitting innocently near the mixing spoons. Gertie would never use mixed nuts, nor would Mrs. Blocksby. Pauline's allergy was well known. Even Felicity's delicate pastries were nut-free. Agatha picked up the tin. "Who opened this?" Felicity appeared at her elbow, wiping a faint smear of cream from her lace glove. "Oh, that. I was just tidying. Someone left it out of place." "Tidying?" Agatha asked, voice sharp. "With cream on your gloves?" Felicity glanced at the smear, then smiled too quickly. "A little spill, nothing sinister." Before Agatha could press further, Mrs. Blocksby hurried over. "Agatha, dear, could you help me with the side dishes? The vicar is terribly anxious about timing." Agatha reluctantly set the nuts down. Felicity drifted away with suspicious serenity. Later, while the casseroles bubbled and Gertie lectured Pauline on proper pudding storage, Agatha slipped out to the drive for air. She pushed open the vicarage door and froze. Dacres and Henry Crisp stood in the gravel path, voices low but fierce. "You'll ruin me," Henry hissed. "You'll ruin yourself," Dacres replied, amused. "Your pub is a death trap. My investors will buy the coaching in and create a proper gastropub. You can adapt or close." "Carsley doesn't need a gastropub," Dacres chuckled. "Carsley doesn't know what it needs. That's why I'm here." Henry's shoulders tensed like he was holding back a punch. Agatha stepped back before they noticed her. The air prickled with tension, another mark in the growing catalogue of motives. Returning to the kitchen, she felt an uneasy jolt. The trifle bowl had moved again, just slightly, its base leaving a faint crescent smear where it had been nudged. The open tin of nuts now sat closer to her dish. She scanned the room, Felicity buttering toast, Gertie guarding her pudding, Pauline polishing cutlery with timid focus, Martin Bladen scribbling nervously, Dacres smirking at his own reflection in the oven door. "Something's not right," Agatha muttered, but Mrs. Blocksby called her over to arrange bowls, and the moment slipped away. As evening settled, the table was laid with WI precision, gleaming cutlery, steam-softened napkins, bowls placed with military symmetry. The desserts, including Agatha's trifle, were arranged for serving after supper. Dacres wandered in, sniffing critically. "Promising," he said, "though hardly London calibre." Agatha wanted to shove a spoon up his nose. Mrs. Blocksby gave a weary smile. "We're grateful for your expertise." "My presence guarantees a memorable evening," Dacres replied smugly. "People will talk about it for years." Agatha shivered, though the kitchen was warm. It wasn't the smugness that bothered her, it was the certainty. Pauline coughed softly. "Is the trifle quite safe? With my allergy?" "Perfectly safe," Gertie snapped, "unless someone tinkered with it." Felicity's spoon paused mid-polish. Martin Bladen scribbled something nervously. Henry Crisp avoided Agatha's eye. Dacres smirked like a man expecting entertainment. Agatha looked again at the trifle, noting every shift, every disturbance in its once pristine structure. Her stomach tightened. She couldn't have said why, but something inside her insisted she keep close watch. The supper preparations ended with an uneasy hush. Bowls were aligned. Spoons gleamed. Plates waited. Trouble waited too. The others drifted toward the dining room. Agatha lingered, glancing at the trifle one last time. A faint tug of instinct whispered, "This isn't quite over." She switched off the kitchen light and followed the others, but the unease clung to her like flour dust. Later that night, she would remember this moment clearly. The shifted bowl, the open nuts, the cream on Felicity's glove, the argument in the drive, and Dacres' smug promise echoing in the warm, bustling kitchen. A memorable evening. Hodge greeted her when she returned home briefly to change, brushing against her leg like a small, furry warning. She stroked him once and sighed. "Something's off, Hodge. I can feel it." Hodge blinked, unimpressed, and padded toward his food bowl. Agatha followed with a worried glance over her shoulder, unease settling deeper, like a shadow growing under the custard. "Someone pass the salt before I lose the will to live," Agatha muttered as she took her seat at the vicarage table. It was meant to sound light, but the strain in her voice betrayed last night's humiliation. Only Mrs. Blocksby heard and offered a sympathetic smile before returning to her campaign to keep the evening civil. The dining room glowed under soft lamplight, the air warm with polite chatter and mildly overcooked vegetables. Pauline Hurst sat closest to the safest-looking dishes, nudging them like suspicious animals. Henry Crisp occupied a corner with the gloom of a man approaching tax season. Martin Bladen kept dabbing at his forehead, though nothing in the room was hot enough to justify it. Felicity Trent, graceful as a swan at a tedious luncheon, arranged her napkin with exaggerated composure. Then there was Leonard Dacres. He took his seat as though preparing for a televised coronation. "Let us hope," he declared, "that tonight's offerings rise above village tradition." Agatha reached for her wine immediately. "If he insults one more vegetable," she muttered, "I'll fling the bowl at him." "Patience, dear," Mrs. Blocksby whispered. "Spiritual calm." Agatha took a longer drink. Spiritual calm tasted suspiciously like cheap Merlot. Dinner progressed with Dacres recounting tales of punishing celebrity chefs, all of whom he described as fond of their own reflections but not much else. He offered a loud critique of Henry's pub, uninspired, Felicity's tart from the WI competition, prettier than its maker, and even Mrs. Blocksby's mashed potatoes, slightly moralistic. Mrs. Blocksby accepted the insult with admirable grace. Henry stabbed a carrot with alarming force. Agatha ignored most of it, focusing instead on her second glass of wine. She was determined to enjoy the supper, or at least remain numb through it. When the main dishes had been cleared, Mrs. Blocksby stood. "Shall we proceed to dessert?" The room brightened, except for Pauline, who watched the serving table with open dread. "I'll just stick to fruit," she murmured. "One never knows with nuts." Dacres laughed loudly. "Nonsense, my dear. Nut allergies are fashionable these days, a convenient excuse for avoiding calories." Pauline went crimson. Agatha's hand clenched around her spoon. "You ought to be ashamed," she snapped, "mocking someone's medical condition." "Please," Dacres said, waving a dismissive hand. "If I die tonight, at least it will be from boredom, not custard." And then, with theatrical relish, he reached for Agatha's trifle. She held her breath. The knife edge between pride and dread wobbled precariously. If he praised it, she would forgive half his sins. If he mocked it, well, there were heavy candlesticks in the vicarage. He dipped a large spoonful, closed his eyes, and smirked. Excessive, overdressed, ambitious to the point of desperation. Another spoonful. "Though I admit the texture has improved." Agatha blinked. Improved? She had not touched the trifle since last night. Pauline raised a trembling hand. "I'm sure it's delicious, but I mustn't try any. Nuts!" "Oh, do spare us," Dacres snapped. A whiff of peanut never killed anyone. Pauline recoiled while Mrs. Bloxby stepped in. "Mr. Dacres, we all respect Pauline's condition." "What condition?" Dacres began, then stopped. His smirk faltered. A flush crept across his face. Agatha's stomach lurched. He coughed sharply, once, twice, before grasping the edge of the table as if it were tilting. His breathing turned rough and desperate. His eyes widened in pure panic. "What's he doing?" Henry whispered. "He's choking!" Pauline cried. "No," Martin Bladen said faintly. "He's reacting. Anaphylaxis." Dacres staggered back, knocking dessert dishes across the table. Agatha's trifle bowl tipped, spilling cream across the cloth. With a strangled gasp, he clutched at his throat, eyes bulging, face reddening fast. Mrs. Bloxby was already running to the phone. "We need an ambulance," Pauline screamed. Felicity stumbled backward into the wall. Henry cursed under his breath. Martin froze like a statue awaiting judgment. Agatha stood rooted, gripping the serving spoon still dripping with custard, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes confirmed. Her trifle. Her dish. Her hands. Dacres collapsed to the floor. The room exploded into chaos. Someone shouted for water. Pauline sobbed. Mrs. Bloxby pleaded for the ambulance to hurry. Felicity fumbled uselessly with a napkin. Martin took a step forward, then back again, paralyzed. Agatha dropped to her knees beside Dacres. His breathing was shallow and ragged. His skin was blotching. "Where's his injection pen?" she yelled. "He said he had an allergy." Pauline searched blindly through his jacket pockets. "It's not here. It should be here." Agatha stared in horror. Not here. Why not here? Why would his life-saving injection pen be missing the very night he needed it? The paramedics burst in moments later and Bill Wong arrived right behind them. He assessed the scene with grim professionalism. There was nothing more they could do. Dacres gave one final shudder and lay still. Mrs. Bloxby put a hand to her mouth. Pauline collapsed into tears. Agatha felt a cold weight settle over her chest, pressing, accusing. Bill knelt beside the body, jaw tightening. After a whispered exchange with the paramedics, he rose slowly and turned to Agatha. It was an anaphylactic shock. Severe. Too fast. Agatha felt the room sway. But the trifle, my trifle. Bill's tone shifted, suddenly formal. "Agatha, who handled this dessert?" She tried to speak. Words tangled. She remembered the open nut tin, the shifted bowl, Felicity's cream-smudged glove, Henry's argument, Martin's clipboard, her own threats at the WI. I don't know," she whispered. Henry stepped forward defensively. "She's not responsible. There were plenty of us in the kitchen." Bill wrote something in his notebook. The sound of pen on paper felt like an accusation carved in stone. Movement caught Mrs. Bloxby's eye. She reached toward a chair. "His bag," she murmured. "Perhaps the pen is in here." But the bag was disturbingly light. She opened it fully. No pen. Not even the compartment where one should have been. Her soft voice cut through the silence. "It's missing." Bill's expression darkened. "Missing?" He closed the bag gently, then glanced at the overturned dishes, the scattered spoons, the ruined trifle. "I'm afraid," he said quietly, "we must treat this as suspicious." Suspicious. The word hit Agatha like a physical blow. Half the village had witnessed her vow to shove the trifle into Dacres' face. Half the village had watched him insult her. Half the village had seen her rage, her embarrassment, her wounded pride. And now he lay dead on the vicarage floor, custard on his sleeve, her dessert smeared across the tablecloth like an accusation written in cream. As the paramedics lifted the body, Agatha wrapped her arms around herself, cold despite the warm room. Pauline sobbed into Mrs. Bloxby's shoulder. Felicity stared at the mess with haunted eyes. Henry muttered something about fate. Martin dabbed his forehead, sweating harder than ever. Bill approached gently. "Agatha," he said, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to think carefully. Anyone could have handled that dish earlier." Agatha nodded numbly, but her heart hammered in dread. Her trifle, her humiliation, her temper, her fault, at least in village gossip terms. The room slowly emptied, leaving only the wreckage of a supper gone horribly wrong. Agatha stared at the ruined trifle, feeling as if it stared back. Her breath shuddered out. "They'll think I killed him," she whispered. Mrs. Bloxby touched her arm. "We'll find the truth." But Agatha wasn't listening. She stood alone amid overturned dishes, the sweetness of custard clinging to the air like an accusation she could not shake. At home later, Hodge pressed against her leg, sensing trouble. She sank onto the sofa, stroking his warm fur with a trembling hand. The kettle clicked softly in the quiet kitchen. "Death by custard," she muttered bitterly. "And they'll blame me. Of course they will." Hodge blinked, unimpressed, and curled into her lap, her one calm certainty in a night full of fear. "Trust the national press to make everything worse," Agatha growled, marching toward the Evesham newsstand as though preparing to throttle it. She hadn't meant to come into town for anything but errands, a vague term that allowed dignity while fleeing gossip, but fate had other plans. She froze mid-stride. A lurid tabloid headline screamed from the top shelf, "Poisoned pudding chef dies in Cotswold shocker." Below it, smaller but still mortifying, "Local woman's trifle linked to tragic collapse." "Local woman," Agatha muttered. "Cowards." The vendor glanced at her with the wary sympathy reserved for exploding kettles. Agatha pivoted away, making a strangled noise somewhere between outrage and indigestion. She had survived London agencies, gossiping villagers, and 1 or 2 murder attempts, but she had never, ever survived national ridicule involving pudding. Her handbag vibrated. She snatched up the phone. "What?" Roy Silver shrieked with theatrical delight. "Aggie, darling, you're in the news." "I am not," Agatha snarled. "It says local woman." "Oh, but it's obviously you. Think of the exposure. We could spin this into—" She hung up before he suggested a cookbook titled Death by Dessert. Still fuming, she stalked back to her car and drove to Carsley with the righteous fury of a wronged heroine. Sadly, righteous heroines did not have to stop halfway to calm themselves with barley sugars. Carsley shop, or as Agatha now thought of it, the den of gleeful betrayal, was packed. Doris Simpson hovered by the bread counter, whispering earnestly to Mrs. Mason, whose expression radiated the self-satisfaction of a woman who had always distrusted trifles. "Oh, Agatha," Doris said brightly, "we were just discussing—" "I know what you were discussing," Agatha snapped. "Everyone's discussing it. The entire country is discussing it." Mrs. Mason sniffed. "Awful business. Truly awful. But really one must be careful with ingredients. Nothing was wrong with my ingredients." "That's not what the papers imply," Mrs. Mason replied, savouring the implication like a boiled sweet. Gertie Pym swept past, holding a nut-free loaf as if it were the crown jewels. "Some people," she declared loudly, "will never learn proper baking." Agatha bristled. "My trifle did not contain nuts." Gertie said, non-committal. "So they always say." Mrs. Blocksby appeared like a calming angel descending into a chicken coop. "Ladies," she said gently, "gossip rarely helps. Agatha is distressed." "I am furious," Agatha corrected. "Fury," Mrs. Blocksby amended with a small smile, "also benefits from tea." Before she could herd Agatha toward the exit, the shop door opened and Bill Wong entered. Of course, it had to be the exact moment when Agatha was blocking the doorway with indignation and a loaf of bread she didn't intend to buy. They collided spectacularly. Bill steadied her with both hands. "Sorry, Agatha." "Sorry? I'm being persecuted by carbohydrates." Bill blinked. "That isn't quite what I meant." A ripple of delighted gossip surged through the shop. Agatha fled before someone produced opera glasses. Bill arrived at her cottage an hour later, notebook in hand, and constable earnestness radiating from every button. Hodge wound smugly around his ankles, clearly approving of law enforcement visiting his home. Agatha folded her arms. "If you've come to arrest me, you can at least take your shoes off." "I'm not arresting you. I need your statement." That's what they always say before the handcuffs. His patient look softened her irritation just slightly. He took a seat at the table, opened his notebook, and began the slow, methodical dissection of her dignity. "Let's start with your recipe." "Why? You've eaten my trifle. You know it does not contain nuts." "I need it on record." Agatha recited the ingredients with grudging precision. Bill asked where each item had been purchased. He asked who had watched her assemble the trifle. He asked who might have had access to it before the vicarage supper. "Everyone," Agatha said finally. "It's Carsley. People wander everywhere." Bill continued. "You saw the open tin of mixed nuts?" "Yes," and the bowl was moved. "Anyone nearby at the time?" She hesitated. Felicity wiping her glove, Henry lingering, Martin hovering near shelves, Pauline present but timid. "Possibly," she said, hating the vagueness. Hodge jumped onto the table and sat squarely on Bill's notes. Bill sighed. "Hodge, please." The cat did not move. Agatha envied his absolute confidence. Bill repeated his interviews with everyone involved. Felicity maintained she popped in only to help tidy. Her eyes had glittered with offended innocence, but she added a curious detail. "I never touched the trifle. It wasn't my place." Which, Agatha thought, sounded exactly like something someone guilty would rehearse. Henry Crisp insisted he never re-entered the kitchen after the main course. Unfortunately for him, Doris remembered otherwise. "He carried empty dishes in," she told Bill, delighted to be helpful. "Looked cross as thunder, too." Gertie Pym, surprisingly, claimed complete ignorance. "I avoid trifles," she said. "They're frivolous. A proper dessert stands on its own." She did not blink at the mention of nuts, only sniffed as though nuts were rabble. Martin Bladen explained he had inspected the kitchen stores briefly. "Procedure," he said, wiping his brow. "I heard raised voices outside. Sounded like Henry and Mr. Dacre's." Nothing new, nothing comforting, nothing that cleared Agatha. Later, Bill returned with a new piece of evidence, a jar of mixed nuts discovered in the WI supply cupboard. Newly opened, no event recipe required nuts, yet someone had used them. Everyone knew about his allergy, Bill said. He refused Gertie's biscuits. He mentioned nearly dying at a hotel last year. Agatha felt the bottom of her stomach sink. So someone used that knowledge deliberately. "Possibly," Bill said. "But motive matters. Who had something to gain, or something to hide?" The entire village, Agatha thought bleakly, had something to hide. Bill's expression softened. "Agatha, you mustn't interfere." She stared at him. "Bill, I am the woman whose trifle is being blamed nationwide. What exactly do you expect me to do? Knit?" He closed his notebook slowly. "Just be careful." Agatha lifted her chin. "Careful is dull." He sighed. "Which is why I said it." After Bill left, she stood alone in her warm kitchen, arms crossed, heart kicking hard with humiliation and anger. Somewhere in the village, someone had tampered with her dessert. Someone had killed Leonard Dacres. Someone was letting her take the fall. Agatha Raisin did not take falls quietly. She snatched up her coat. "If Bill thinks I'm staying out of this," she muttered, "he's delirious." Hodge stretched luxuriously on the windowsill, unimpressed by murder but deeply invested in the sunbeam he occupied. Agatha softened. "This is all your fault, you know, pouring my sponge, distracting me." Hodge yawned as though accepting credit for chaos. Agatha poured herself tea, the kettle sighing like a weary confidant. She set the cup down, squared her shoulders, and glared toward Carsley, as if the killer lurked behind her neighbour's roses. "Fine," she said aloud. "If they think I won't investigate, they don't know Agatha Raisin." Hodge flicked his tail, settled deeper into his sunbeam, and granted her the moral support of one slow blink, the cosy domestic punctuation mark to a morning that had otherwise gone entirely to hell. "If one more journalist calls me for a quote, I'll drown them in sherry," Agatha announced to Hodge, who ignored her in favour of washing a paw. She grabbed her handbag with the air of a woman marching into battle. If the wretched newspapers insisted on fawning over Felicity Trent, tragic witness, elegant bystander, heroine of the pudding disaster, then Agatha would confront the woman directly. After all, she told herself grimly, it was always best to inspect the competition. Felicity's rented cottage sat on the edge of Carsley, nestled in a picturesque lane that Agatha immediately resented. The place was too perfect. The brass knocker gleamed, the window boxes overflowed with tasteful winter greenery, even the gravel looked smug. Agatha knocked. The door opened with film-worthy timing. "Agatha?" Felicity said warmly, as though greeting a dear friend instead of a suspected saboteur. "What a lovely surprise." "Is it?" Agatha asked, stepping inside without waiting. "I thought I'd check on a fellow victim of the press." The cottage interior was even worse. Stylish, expensive furnishings arranged in a way that suggested Felicity had spent years cultivating effortless charm. Agatha sat gingerly on a cream sofa that looked like it punished spills with capital sentences. "Coffee?" Felicity asked. "Yes, strong, and none of that fancy foam business." Felicity returned with delicate cups and a plate of perfect little pastries. Agatha eyed them suspiciously. "Did you bake these?" Of course, Felicity said, smiling modestly. A habit I never quite shook from London. Agatha sniffed. London didn't seem to appreciate it. Felicity's smile flickered but held. One must accept life's difficulties. A brittle camaraderie formed as they drank coffee under the shadow of national scandal. Both women pretended not to notice that the papers adored Felicity while portraying Agatha as a culinary menace. They do love saying you were brave, Agatha remarked tartly. Tragically bravely present, bravely helpful, bravely decorative. Felicity laughed lightly. Well, the press will say anything for drama. Agatha leaned forward. Speaking of drama, you knew Dacres from before. A pause, a small one, but Agatha spotted it like a hawk. Felicity folded her hands neatly. We crossed paths in London, yes, but it was a lifetime ago. I've made my peace with it. Funny, Agatha said, because he didn't look peaceful when he recognized you. The veneer cracked, only for a second. Felicity set down her cup. May I ask something, Agatha? Are you here to be friendly or to interrogate me? That depends on your answers. Felicity gave a soft, weary sigh that made Agatha feel momentarily like a villain. Very well. I owned a patisserie once. Small, fashionable, popular. Then we expanded too quickly. I trusted the wrong investor. Hygiene became an issue. We failed an inspection. And Dacres amplified it. Amplified? Agatha repeated. He destroyed me, Felicity said quietly. His review was lethal. I lost everything. She delivered the speech so gracefully that Agatha almost felt sympathy. Almost. Must be awkward, Agatha said dryly, being back in the tabloids with his name beside yours. Awkward is polite, Felicity murmured. She rose to refill the coffee pot. The moment her footsteps faded down the hallway, Agatha stood. This will only take a peek, she told herself, already scanning the room. On the coffee table sat a glossy food magazine. A page had been folded sharply. Agatha opened it and found a glowing feature on Leonard Dacres, the usual smug picture of him beside a restaurant he'd condemned. But tucked inside was a clipping, his brutal review of a patisserie, Felicity's patisserie. The headline alone was vicious. Trent's tasteless tart shop collapses under its own pretense. Agatha winced. Even she wouldn't have written that. She slipped the clipping back into place as footsteps approached. She glided to the sofa just in time. More coffee? Felicity asked. Oh, why not? Agatha said with false cheer. I need resilience. Felicity poured gracefully, but Agatha's eye caught something behind her. The kitchen shelf, visible through the doorway. On it sat a tall, elegant bottle of almond liqueur, identical to the one Felicity had donated to the WI raffle days before. Funny how it had found its way back home. And that bottle? Agatha asked, nodding innocently. Felicity glanced over. Oh, yes, I decided the raffle didn't need such an extravagant prize. I retrieved it after the meeting. Did you? Agatha asked, voice smooth as custard left too long in the fridge. Felicity offered a serene smile. Waste not. Suspicious, Agatha thought. Very suspicious. But even she had to admit Felicity played the role of gentle victim beautifully. Terrible business about the trifle, Felicity murmured. I do hope Bill clears everything up soon. Oh, I'm sure he will, Agatha said, giving her a narrow look. I intend to help. How reassuring, Felicity said, though her smile tightened. Coffee finished, Agatha asked for the loo and wandered down the hallway, ostensibly searching for it. While returning, she slipped her head briefly into the small study. Piles of receipts, a handwritten note, and a London envelope lay scattered across the desk. One envelope bore Dacres' distinctive, arrogant handwriting. We will speak soon. You still owe me. Agatha's eyebrows shot up. Still owes me, she repeated silently, just like the line in Dacres' notebook. When she returned to the sitting room, Felicity stood by the window, hands clasped, expression perfectly composed. I won't keep you, she said sweetly. Thank you for visiting. Agatha forced a smile. It was enlightening. The cold outside hit her like a slap. Not a grim, dramatic cold, but that prickly, creeping English cold that seeped through scarves and annoyed the soul. Fog had settled lightly over the lane, swallowing distant hedges. Agatha pulled her coat tighter. That woman is hiding something, she muttered. Something big. But then she paused. Because truthfully, almost everyone had a reason to hate Leonard Dacres. Henry Crisp, furious at the threat to his pub. Martin Bladen, terrified of exposure. Gertie Pym, publicly humiliated. Felicity, professionally ruined. Even the WI, collectively wounded in pride. Hatred of Dacres wasn't unique. It was practically a county pastime. Still, Felicity's brittle charm, her too-perfect house, the almond liqueur, the clipped reviews, and the mysterious "still owes me" note formed a picture Agatha didn't like. Fog curled around her shoes as she walked, a quiet, creeping shroud. "I'll sort you out," she told the mist sternly, though the mist had done nothing wrong. "And I'll sort her out too, if she's the one." Her thoughts churned as she made her way back to the village. Felicity might be hiding guilt, or just hiding shame. It was hard to tell. Elegant women were always the most suspicious, Agatha believed. They could conceal murder under a tasteful cardigan. By the time she reached her cottage lane, her feet were cold and her mood colder, but the determination in her chest burned bright. She let herself in, hung her coat, and found Hodge sitting on the table, staring at her like a furry magistrate. "Oh, don't you judge me too," she said. Hodge blinked slowly, then yawned and stretched, paws kneading the tablecloth. Agatha sighed, filled the kettle, and stood watching it warm. Fog outside, tea inside, suspects everywhere. And Felicity Trent, elegant, wounded, suspicious, moving quickly to the top of her list. Hodge settled by her elbow, purring faintly, the soft, domestic sound grounding her far better than tea. "Well, boy," she murmured, "the souffle's fallen, and something else will too if I get my way." Hodge flicked his tail in quiet agreement. "Gossip cures nothing." "But it certainly keeps the blood moving," Agatha informed Hodge as she fastened her coat with unnecessary force. The cat blinked, unimpressed, and returned to washing his tail. Agatha stomped out anyway. She needed information, distraction, and possibly chips. The Red Lion could provide all three. The pub was already humming by the time she stepped inside, its warm amber glow embracing the lunchtime crowd. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. The atmosphere was brisk, cozy, and blissfully free of reporters. Henry Crisp, however, looked as cheerful as a rain-soaked scarecrow. "If another person asks if I poisoned him," he muttered before Agatha could speak, "I'll throw myself in the river." "I wouldn't," Agatha said dryly. "It's shallow this season. You'd only twist an ankle." Henry managed a bark of laughter. "Sit down, Agatha. Want lunch? Something simple like a bowl of non-lethal soup?" "Don't tempt me." She settled at a table near the bar. Henry arrived with a plate of chips, the kind that glistened with comfort and cholesterol. Agatha reached for one with a sigh of gratitude. "Tabloids say he ate here once," she said casually, "before all this." Henry flinched. "That tasting evening, worst night of my life." Agatha perked up. "And what exactly did he taste?" "Everything. And insulted everything too. Said the lamb was confused, the peas resentful, and the mash as dull as long marriage." Agatha winced. "Cruel." "Cruel doesn't cover it." Henry rubbed his forehead. "After the meal, he cornered me about some gastropub project at the derelict coaching inn. Said his investors would turn it into a trendy destination. Wanted me to get on board, meaning pay him to keep quiet." Agatha leaned forward. "He blackmailed you?" Henry's face went red. "He called it collaboration. Said he'd feature me on TV, more like feature me as a joke." Agatha tapped her nails against the table. Plenty of people had reason to hate him. Henry snorted. The man collected enemies like bottle caps. Before Agatha could prod further, the pub door swung open and a voice floated in, warm and amused. "Darling Aggie, I thought I smelled indignation." Charles Fraith sauntered inside like a man stepping onto his own private stage. Scarf draped elegantly, expression leisurely smug, he went straight to the bar as if he lived there. Agatha rolled her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "Passing through," Charles said, already ordering a drink he didn't intend to pay for. "Or rather, passing by your cottage and discovering you weren't home. Naturally, I assumed you'd be somewhere dramatic." Agatha scowled. "For once, I came here to think." "How novel." Charles sat opposite her, tipping his chair dangerously. "How's the trifle of doom?" Agatha bristled. "Don't you start." "Oh, come now. A little branding opportunity. Agatha's fatal trifle. We could sell shirts." "I'll strangle you with your own scarf." Henry dropped Charles's drink onto the table. "If you two plan to fight, take it outside. I've had enough trouble. Charles lifted the glass. To trouble, then. Agatha leaned closer to him. We're here to investigate, not drink. I investigate best after a drink, Charles said serenely. I become more philosophical. You become more useless, he smiled. True, but charmingly useless. Henry returned, rubbing his temples. If the two of you are detectives now, try solving why the fish delivery is late. Agatha ignored him. Henry, when exactly did Dacres come for that tasting evening? 3 weeks ago, Henry said. Invited half the village. Thought I'd get publicity, he snorted. Got humiliation instead. And the mixed nuts? Agatha asked. Henry blinked. What mixed nuts? The ones Bill mentioned, the bar snack order. Henry frowned. Oh, those. A new supplier insisted we try them. I bought a few bags, left one in the shared larder behind the pub for a few days. We let the WI borrow it during big events. Agatha stiffened. Did you now? Only for a day or two. I didn't think anything of it. Do you still have the invoice? Agatha asked with a tone that made Charles perk up. Henry pointed behind the bar. Somewhere in that mess. Charles was already up, rummaging through a stack of receipts with the enthusiasm of a man hunting for treasure or free alcohol. Aha, he exclaimed. One invoice for mixed nuts dated the day before the WI competition. Agatha snatched it. Interesting. Henry crossed his arms. Now don't start imagining things. Nuts come through this pub all the time. Do they? Agatha asked sweetly. Because the jar Bill found in the WI cupboard was freshly opened. Henry's face went ashy. Are you suggesting I— No, Agatha said quickly. If you wanted to kill him, you'd hit him with a frying pan. Charles coughed a laugh. Accurate, Henry glared. I'm not a murderer. No, Agatha admitted, but you had motive. He threatened your business. That's not motive, Henry said tightly. That's irritation, different things. Agatha believed him. Henry was many things, blunt, overwhelmed, prone to dramatic groans. But cunning wasn't one of them. He would never sprinkle nuts into anything discreetly. He would make a show of it, complain loudly, and probably sneeze halfway through. What about the argument outside the vicarage? Agatha asked. Henry reddened again. I told him the village didn't need a gastropub. He told me I didn't understand progress. Charles smirked. So naturally you wanted to kill him. Henry threw his towel at Charles. Get out. Charles dodged. Only jesting. Agatha leaned back, studying Henry's worried frown. He was a man pushed too far, yes, but not pushed into murder. She could see it in the way he fidgeted, the way he spoke too fast, the way he still worried about toilet paper stock even during a murder investigation. A murderer didn't worry about loo rolls. Charles, meanwhile, wandered off to charm Henry's wife, who had emerged from the kitchen muttering about inconsiderate food critics. From the way she smiled at Charles, Agatha suspected he had been charming her for years. Agatha rose from the table. I'm going to check that larder. Henry paled. Why? Because killers hide things in larders, Charles called cheerfully. Agatha shot him a look, but he was already leaning against the counter, earning fresh giggles from Mrs. Crisp. The larder sat behind the pub, a cool, narrow storeroom lined with shelves of jars, tins, and cleaning supplies. Agatha stepped inside, noting the faint smell of spilled beer and old onions. A few nuts remained on the floor, not enough to prove anything, but enough to suggest someone had opened a bag hurriedly. Agatha crouched and picked one up. Not evidence, she muttered, but suspicious. She also spotted a small smudge on the shelf, a faint trace of something oily. Almond, perhaps? Or just cooking grease? Hard to tell. Footsteps approached. Charles leaned against the doorway. Find anything? Maybe, maybe not, Charles smiled. Very helpful. Agatha straightened. Henry's not the killer. He might be, Charles said lightly, but he's too obvious. Murderers rarely storm about complaining. Exactly. Charles offered his arm. Lunch? Investigation, Agatha corrected, but she allowed him to escort her nonetheless. They stepped out into the pub garden. A light drizzle, the first in several chapters, misted the air, fine and fleeting. Not enough to count as gloomy, Agatha thought defensively, remembering her own atmosphere rules. Look at Henry, Charles murmured. Henry stood at the pub doorway, watching them with a worried, earnest expression. He looked more frightened than guilty. Agatha sighed. Poor man. His biggest crime is overboiled peas. True, Charles said. So we move on to the next suspect? "Oh yes," Agatha muttered, "and there are far too many." They walked away from the Red Lion, drizzle clinging lightly to Agatha's coat. She brushed it off with irritation. "Do you think someone used those nuts from the larder?" Charles asked. "Yes," Agatha said grimly. "The timing fits, the opportunity fits, and the motive fits half the county." Charles chuckled. "You do keep things cheerful." "I'm cheerful when I have leads," Agatha snapped, "and now I have one." They turned toward Castley Lane, leaving Henry behind them, still wringing his towel like a man hoping to strangle a bad memory. Agatha's determination hardened. Someone had used nuts to murder Dacres, someone who had access to that larder, someone who counted on chaos to hide the truth. She walked faster, her mind buzzing with theories. Charles jogged to keep up. "Aggie, slow down. You'll scare the sheep." "Good," she said. "They should be scared." By the time she reached her cottage, Hodge sat waiting on the windowsill, tail twitching with judgment. Agatha sighed. "Don't look at me like that. I'm doing my best." Hodge yawned, stretched, and knocked a pencil off the table with quiet disdain. A perfectly cozy end to a perfectly maddening day. "This place smells like despair and old custard," Agatha muttered as she stepped into the Mercester Council offices. A sour, stale odour greeted her, an institutional blend of paper, reheated tea, and the ghosts of bad decisions. Charles, of course, looked delighted. "I adore local government buildings," he said. "Such democratic ugliness." Agatha shot him a look. "We're here to investigate, not redecorate." The reception area flickered under tired strip lights. A poster about proper food storage drooped sadly on a pinboard. Agatha glared at it as though it had personally sabotaged her trifle. Charles leaned against the counter, smiling at the receptionist with his most languid charm. "Good morning. We're hoping to speak with someone about environmental health procedures." The receptionist, a woman with a neat bob and an air of mild boredom, perked up at the sight of him. "Of course. Any specific department?" Agatha slid forward before Charles could flirt them into a bureaucratic pit. "We're making inquiries about Martin Bladen." The receptionist blinked, then lowered her voice. "Oh, him." Agatha's instincts sharpened. "Is there a problem?" Charles beamed. "We do love a problem." "Well," the receptionist said, glancing around, "I can't discuss staff formally, but—" she leaned in. "People talk." Agatha's heart quickened. "What do they say?" "That he's flexible, with rules. Some businesses get glowing reports after he inspects. Others don't." She hesitated. There were rumours of payments, nothing proven. Internal inquiry, very hush-hush. Agatha slapped Charles's arm triumphantly. "I told you." "You did," Charles admitted graciously. "You are occasionally right." Agatha turned back to the receptionist. "Did Leonard Dacres ever deal with Bladen?" "Oh yes," she said. "Mr. Dacres visited for a records request. He said he was preparing a documentary segment on hygiene standards. Very dramatic man." "Dramatic," Agatha echoed. "Did he access Bladen's file?" "He filled out a form." The receptionist shrugged. "And Bladen was furious. Said Dacres was out to ruin him." Agatha exchanged a meaningful glance with Charles. Motive established. They were ushered into a cramped meeting room decorated with filing cabinets, dead pot plants, and a whiteboard listing rota changes from 1998. A junior officer named Daniel arrived with a folder. "We can't share official documents," Daniel said nervously, "but I can explain general procedures." Agatha leaned forward. "Explain away." Daniel cleared his throat. "There was an internal audit of Mr. Bladen last year. Minor irregularities, mostly misunderstandings." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstandings involving envelopes of cash?" Daniel flushed. "No, nothing like that. Just incomplete paperwork. A few flagged reports, but the rumours got exaggerated." Agatha folded her arms. "Did Dacres know?" Daniel looked pained. "Yes. Someone sent him a copy of a preliminary audit report. Bladen was terrified. Said Dacres was extorting him for consultancy fees. You know how TV people are." "Oh, I do," Agatha said darkly. "He was threatening to expose Bladen on national television." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. Mr. Dacres asked for cooperation on some program about counsel incompetence, meaning if Bladen didn't pay up, the program would focus on him." Agatha's mind raced. Bladen had a powerful motive for silencing Dacres. Professional ruin, financial disaster, public humiliation, all very persuasive incentives for murder. Charles stretched his legs. "Tell me, Daniel, was Mr. Bladen working at the WI competition?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Routine inspection. He left with Mr. Dacres afterward." "And at the vicarage supper?" Agatha pressed. Daniel consulted his notes. "He attended to verify food temperatures and ingredient storage. He left before dessert." Agatha nodded slowly. "Convenient." "But," Daniel added quickly, "during the half-hour before dessert was served, Mr. Bladen was on a council phone line speaking with his manager, logged and time-stamped." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Logged?" "Yes," Daniel said. "Phone records confirm he was on the call for 20 minutes. Agatha felt her triumph wobble. That half-hour had seemed the most likely window for the fatal tampering. "So, he has an alibi," Charles mused. "How irritating." "Possibly," Daniel said. "But he could have tampered earlier, at the WI hall, for example." Agatha considered that. Bladen had been buzzing around the kitchen at the competition, opening jars, moving packaging, commenting on temperatures. She remembered him frowning at her trifle like a man assessing a structural hazard. He'd had every opportunity to slip something into the dessert. But then she remembered Felicity's cream-smudged glove, and Henry's nuts invoice, and Martin Bladen's trembling hands. Too many suspects, too much motive, too many opportunities. Agatha stood abruptly. "Thank you, Daniel. You've been very helpful." Charles added with a grin. "Exceptionally helpful. Your manager should promote you." Daniel blushed so hard the room brightened briefly. They left the council building and stepped into the car park. Agatha inhaled deeply, as though trying to cleanse her lungs of bureaucratic dust. "Well?" Charles asked. "Feel triumphant?" "I feel annoyed," Agatha snapped. "Every clue leads somewhere, and everywhere contradicts itself. Felicity had motive. Henry had opportunity. Bladen had both. And yet he's got an alibi for the crucial 30 minutes. "Perhaps," Charles said lightly, "you're overthinking it." "I do not overthink," Agatha said, bristling. "I think exactly enough, which is more than can be said for you." Charles opened the passenger door for her. "I provide charm. You provide fury. It balances beautifully." They drove back toward Carsley, the winter light softening fields and hedgerows. Agatha sat stiffly, glaring at the landscape as though it were personally obstructing justice. "Let's review," Charles said cheerfully. "Felicity lost her business because of Dacres, and appears to have retrieved her own raffle prize. Suspicious." "Deeply," Agatha muttered. "Henry was blackmailed, insulted, threatened, and stocked nuts in his shared larder. Also deeply suspicious." "Bladen took bribes, panicked at Dacres' investigations, hovered around the dessert table, and knows precisely what nuts can do." "Suspicious squared," Agatha said. Charles beamed. "So we have 3 suspects, all deliciously guilty-looking." "We need opportunity," Agatha said. "Actual opportunity. Who had unobstructed access to the trifle in the hours before Dacres ate it?" "You," Charles offered lightly. Agatha swatted his arm. "Not funny." "Only a little," she sighed. "Bladen could have tampered the night before at the WI hall, or Felicity could have doctored it while pretending to tidy, or Henry could have slipped something in when moving dishes." "All plausible," Charles said. "But none certain," Agatha finished. Her frustration simmered. She hated uncertainty almost as much as she hated tabloid photographers. Back in Carsley, Charles insisted they stop at the bakery. "One must eat to think," he said while buying 2 eclairs and a bun, and Agatha stewed in thoughts of betrayal, deceit, and almond liqueur. Charles handed her a pastry. "Here." "I'm not hungry." "You're always hungry when you're furious." Agatha accepted the eclair with a grunt. He wasn't wrong. They walked slowly down the lane. In the distance, the WI hall stood quiet, empty, and faintly accusing. Agatha imagined jars whispering secrets behind its doors. "Bladen knew everything about food safety," she murmured. "He'd know how allergies work. He'd know how to hide traces." "But he also knew how to log a phone call alibi," Charles noted, "which is either very clever planning or very lucky timing." "Or very fake," Agatha said. "Could he have made the call after the tampering or before? Records show the call, but not his location during it." Charles nodded. "Possible." "Everything's possible," Agatha said through clenched teeth. "That's the trouble." "And the fun," Charles said. She glared at him. "You're enjoying this far too much." "Of course I am," Charles said serenely. "Mystery, intrigue, shared pastry. What's not to love?" Agatha sighed, defeated by his charm. They turned toward her cottage. The lights glowed warmly inside, promising tea, sanity, and one judgmental cat. Agatha paused at the gate. 3 suspects, 3 motives, 3 partial opportunities. "And 1 murder," Charles said. "Do cheer up, Aggie. You'll solve it." "I will," Agatha said grimly. "Even if I have to interrogate the entire county." Charles bowed slightly. "I look forward to watching." She rolled her eyes and stepped inside. Hodge was waiting on the table, tail curled, eyes smug. As Agatha entered, he stretched luxuriously, claiming the room as his. "Well," she told him, dropping her bag, "we may not have answers, but we have suspects." Hodge blinked once, unimpressed but loyal. Agatha filled the kettle. It sighed softly, a comforting domestic note that settled her irritation. "Bladen, Henry, Felicity," she murmured. "One of you is hiding something, and I'll find it." Hodge flicked his whiskers, the perfect cozy punctuation to her determination. "Agatha, dear, please don't be alarmed, but something has surfaced." Mrs. Bloxby stood on Agatha's doorstep wearing the apologetic expression she usually reserved for parishioners confessing to mild embezzlement or aggressive jam-making. In her hand was a brown envelope, creased and slightly grubby. Agatha narrowed her eyes. "If that is another leaflet about forgiveness, I'm not in the mood." "It isn't forgiveness," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "It's Leonard Dacre's." Hodge, who had been stalking a dust mote, immediately lost interest in everything else and bounded toward the envelope. Agatha intercepted him mid-pounce. "Oh, no, you don't. The last thing I need is you eating evidence." They all moved into the sitting room. Mrs. Bloxby settled primly, folded her hands and sighed. Pauline found it, behind a cushion in the vicarage sitting room. She suspected it might relate to matters. Agatha's pulse quickened. "Relate? Mrs. Bloxby, is that his notebook?" Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "I hesitated to bring it. Snooping feels so terribly un-vicarage-like." "That never stopped the WI," Agatha muttered, tearing open the envelope. The notebook emerged like a long-buried treasure, small, worn, stained with grease. Hodge made another attempt to colonize it. Agatha shooed him away with a cushion. A knock rattled the door, followed immediately by Charles's voice. "Aggie? I sensed intrigue. Are we opening parcels without me?" Agatha groaned, but let him in. "Make yourself useful and pour tea." Charles did so cheerfully, then dropped into a chair with the enthusiasm of a schoolboy awaiting scandal. "Right then. Show me the dead man's secrets." Agatha opened the notebook. Inside, cramped handwriting spilled across every page, names, initials, symbols, phone numbers, and recipe notes broken by ominous scribbles. Charles whistled softly. Oh, he was keeping score. Agatha scanned quickly. Here, Felicity appears twice, her patisserie listed under its old name and figures beside it. "Payments," Charles said. "Regular ones, by the look of it." "And Henry," Agatha said, turning pages, "next a gastropub deal." Charles grinned. He would loathe that. Agatha continued. Then, M.B. Martin Bladen, followed by Report 1998, Copies X3. Mrs. Bloxby looked troubled. "Copies? He must have taken precautions." "Oh, he took more than precautions," Agatha muttered. "The man was a walking extortion racket." Charles leaned over her shoulder. "What's this? Old Queen of Cakes hiding little secret? Sea sale?" "That must be Gertie Pym," Agatha said. "Queen of Cakes, yes. But what secret?" "Perhaps she sells cakes illegally under the counter," Charles offered. "Some sort of sponge-based rebellion." Agatha ignored him. "And another one, Vicar's cousin, inheritance fuss, useful if money tight." She looked up sharply. "Pauline?" Mrs. Bloxby's face pinked. "Pauline's affairs are delicate. I shouldn't—" "Vicarage confidentiality, yes. Yes," Agatha said. "But if Dacres was shaking her down—" "She would have told me," Mrs. Bloxby said firmly, then hesitated. "I think." Agatha snapped the notebook shut. "He had something on everyone. The man left a trail of misery thick enough to pave the village." Charles sipped his tea. He turned custard into a protection racket. Almost admirable. "No, Charles," Agatha said. "It is not admirable. Blackmail isn't admirable. Manipulating people through pudding isn't admirable. And writing it all down in a notebook is idiotic. Mrs. Bloxby sighed. He seems to have lived a very unhappy life. Happiness doesn't excuse extortion, Agatha said briskly. He was squeezing half the village. Someone snapped. Before Mrs. Bloxby could protest, a timid knock sounded. Pauline Hurst peeked through the door crack like a frightened dormouse. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, Mrs. Bloxby, I didn't mean to intrude. I just came to check whether the notebook was—" "Oh." She froze at the sight of Charles. "I didn't realize you had company." "Don't worry," Charles said charmingly. "I'm decorative." Pauline flushed crimson. "I only wanted to say, I remembered something else." Agatha gestured her in. "Yes?" Pauline clasped her hands. "When I found the notebook, I recalled a moment, a week before the supper. I didn't think it mattered, but Dacres was in the churchyard, and he was speaking with Felicity Trent." Agatha sat up so quickly she nearly toppled Hodge. "Speaking? What sort of speaking?" "They were standing by the old yew," Pauline said nervously. She handed him an envelope. They both looked tense. I pretended not to see. It felt private. Charles murmured, "Money, or a threat?" Mrs. Bloxby looked pained. "I wish none of this had ever happened." "Unfortunately," Agatha said, "it did, and this notebook proves Felicity wasn't the only one paying him off." "But it does make her very interesting," Charles added cheerfully. "Envelope exchanges rarely imply innocence." Agatha tapped the notebook. "Look at it. Everyone in here had a reason to be rid of him. Felicity with her past, Henry with his pub, Bladen with his bribes, and apparently even Gertie Pym hiding some mysterious sea sail." Charles leaned back. "So which one snapped? Which one decided desert was the tidy solution?" Agatha opened the notebook again, flipping through pages filled with ugly shorthand. She muttered, "A person can tolerate bullying, and humiliation, and debt, but once someone has squeezed them dry, people break." Hodge leapt onto the sofa arm and stared pointedly at Agatha, as if reminding her she had once snapped at him for stepping on her paperwork. Not the same thing, she thought defensively. Mrs. Bloxby gave a soft sigh. "Poor Dacres. He seems to have spread misery everywhere he went." "He harvested it," Agatha corrected. "There's a difference." Charles pointed to a margin note. "Why, Doc, keep safe." "What's that?" he asked. "No idea," Agatha said, "but he must have meant some kind of document related to the W.I. Hall, another leverage point." Mrs. Bloxby looked uncomfortable. "It is unsettling to think he used our village events for collecting secrets." "Not just unsettling," Agatha said. "Strategic. He went where the gossip was, where rivalries simmer. He used competitions, tasting evenings, kitchen inspections, all perfect covers." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "He wasn't just judging trifles. He was judging weaknesses." Agatha closed the notebook slowly. "Someone ended his career permanently, and the more we learn, the more convinced I am that motive came from exhaustion. Someone had nothing left to give him." Pauline shifted nervously. Do you think I should tell Bill what I saw?" "Yes," Agatha said immediately. "No," Charles said at the same time. Mrs. Bloxby looked between them. "Perhaps you both explain." Agatha frowned. "Bill needs facts. Pauline saw something important." Charles countered. "Bill will leap to conclusions. If Pauline says she saw Felicity handing over an envelope, he might fixate on her and miss the wider picture." Agatha pinched the bridge of her nose. "Annoyingly, he has a point." Pauline wrung her hands. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You won't," Agatha said. "Trouble has already been caused." Mrs. Bloxby patted Pauline's shoulder. "We shall think carefully." Charles rose, stretching like a satisfied cat. "So, 3 suspects still holding top position. Felicity, Henry, Bladen, and now Gertie and Pauline have entered the ring." "Pauline is not a suspect," Mrs. Bloxby said quickly. Agatha considered Pauline's shaky posture, her shrinking voice. She doesn't have the temperament for murder. Then she reconsidered. "Though sometimes timid people snap the hardest." Pauline squeaked. "I meant theoretically," Agatha added, waving a hand. "Don't worry, dear." Charles leaned against the mantel. "The notebook gives us motives. Plenty of them. What we still lack is timing." Agatha nodded grimly. "Opportunity. Someone had to slip nuts into the trifle after I made it, but before Dacres shoved it down his throat." Mrs. Bloxby winced. "Agatha, please." Sorry, before the unfortunate incident. Pauline sat gingerly. Could he have done it himself? Accidentally? Agatha shook her head. He was arrogant, not suicidal. Charles sipped his tea, so we know he was blackmailing half the village. That's a dangerous hobby. A lethal one, Agatha said. She flipped through the notebook again. Each scribbled line whispered resentment, secrets, leverage. Dacres hadn't merely criticised people. He'd catalogued their vulnerabilities. He'd filed them like recipes. And someone decided they'd finally had enough. Mrs. Blocksby rose gently. Agatha, take care with this. Villagers can be delicate. Too much truth can bruise people. Agatha looked up at her. Mrs. Blocksby, someone murdered a man with nuts in a trifle. The time for delicacy has passed. Mrs. Blocksby managed a small, rueful smile. Even so. She and Pauline left quietly. The cottage felt heavier once they were gone. Charles nudged the notebook. You realise you look positively gleeful. I do not, Agatha said. I look determined. Gleefully determined. Shut up, Charles. He grinned, kissed her cheek lightly, and sauntered out with the grace of a man who never carried emotional weight. Agatha stayed seated, staring at the notebook as though it might hiss. It was a ledger of grudges, a record of debts, a recipe book for extortion. Hodge hopped onto her lap with a soft thump, curling into a warm, purring loaf. Well, boy, Agatha murmured, stroking his head, whoever killed him wasn't just wounded. They were squeezed dry. The kettle clicked and sighed behind her, a small, domestic punctuation to the growing storm of secrets unfolding in Castley. Agatha woke with a violent jerk as something crashed downstairs. For a dreadful second she thought the ceiling had fallen in, or worse, that Doris Simpson had let herself in to lecture her about community spirit. Then Hodge's furious, throaty yowl rose through the cottage, followed by the unmistakable clatter of crockery being smashed. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha muttered, flinging the covers back. "If that cat has knocked over my good mixing bowl, I swear." A muffled thud answered her. Definitely not a cat-like noise. Hodge, offended by association, howled again. Charles's voice drifted from the guest room, flustered and faintly heroic. "Agatha, did you hear something? Should I, investigate?" "You should put trousers on," she snapped, grabbing her dressing gown. "Try not to trip over your own gallantry." By the time Charles emerged, wrestling with a torch that kept switching itself off, Agatha was already halfway down the stairs. A cold gust blew up from the kitchen. Hodge streaked past her ankles like a furry missile, tail bushed to twice its size. The scene meeting them was a small domestic apocalypse. Cupboard doors hung open. A box of flour lay torn across the floor like snowdrift from a deranged baker. A mug lay smashed in bright shards. Most tellingly, the drawer where Agatha had tucked the brown envelope and notebook now sat gaping and empty. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her anger rose so sharply it felt like a physical thing. "They've taken it," she said at last, voice thin with outrage. "They actually came in here and took it." Charles shone the torch vaguely around the destruction, illuminating a jar of instant coffee rolling in slow circles. "Well, it's flattering in a way. Someone thought you were important enough to burgle." "Shut up." He obligingly shut up. A sound at the back door snapped both to attention. A shadow flickered across the frame, then vanished. Agatha lunged forward, heart pounding. She saw only the blur of a figure vaulting over her garden wall with surprising agility for someone committing crimes in the dead of night. "Stop!" she bellowed, charging out barefoot. Gravel bit into her feet, but she kept running. The night was windy, sharp, and full of rustling hedges. She reached the wall, clambered up, and peered into the darkness. Nothing. Whoever it was had dissolved into the black like a guilty phantom. Charles arrived seconds later, hopelessly brandishing the torch which now emitted only a weak flicker. "See anything?" "Only my dignity slipping away." "What did they take, though?" he asked, though he already knew. "The notebook. And the envelope. Everything." Charles surveyed her expression and wisely said nothing. They returned inside, shivering. That was when Agatha noticed something peculiar cutting through the smell of flour and cold air. A sharp, acrid scent, faint but unmistakable. It reminded her of institutional disinfectant, the sort used in council buildings or hospital corridors. Not a village scent, not a domestic one. "Do you smell that?" she asked. Charles sniffed. Smells like someone spilled a bottle of floor cleaner. No, something specific. I've smelt it at Mercester council offices. She rubbed her arms, unsettled. This wasn't some random burglar. This was someone tidy. Tidy burglars, Charles mused. How very modern. Agatha glared and put the kettle on, because there were moments in life when only tea could prevent murder. Charles perched on a chair, examining the flower footprint on the tiles. Boot tread, he said, sounding surprisingly competent. Large. Male, perhaps. Or a woman with big feet, Agatha said tartly. Don't be sexist. The kettle boiled. She poured water into 2 mismatched mugs, hands trembling. Only once she had tea did she dare call Bill. He arrived quicker than she liked. It suggested he'd been awake, possibly working, and nothing irritated Agatha more than responsible people. Bill took one look at the mess and his face hardened. Agatha, he said, carefully controlled. I told you to hand over the notebook immediately. I was going to, Agatha said with magnificent untruth. I only kept it safe overnight. Bill pointed at the ruined kitchen. Safe? Hodge chose that moment to stalk in, plume tail high, making a show of stepping around the flower as if mortally offended by the chaos. Bill bent to scratch him behind the ears. At least Hodge is unharmed. Well, obviously, Agatha snapped. If they'd touched him, I'd be in prison now. Bill straightened. Tell me exactly what happened. Agatha described the noise, the chase, the vanished figure, and the strange disinfectant smell. Bill listened, shoulders tightening. This is serious. Whoever killed Duckers didn't just panic, they're escalating. Breaking into houses is a very large step. Agatha bristled. I wasn't frightened. You look frightened. I look furious. Both, Charles offered helpfully. Bill shot him a look that silenced even Charles. Agatha, you need to be careful. No charging around on your own. No, don't start, Agatha warned. I'm not one of your constables. No, Bill said, but you are now a target. The words pierced more deeply than she expected. A thin thread of fear slid beneath her bravado. Being suspected was one thing. Being hunted was quite another. Bill took a final sweep of the kitchen. I'll have officers examine the footprints and dust for prints, though I doubt we'll get lucky. Whoever came knew what they wanted. He left shortly after, muttering about reports and extra patrols. The door clicked shut. Silence seeped in. Charles exhaled, deflating. Well, that was invigorating. Shall I make more tea? No, Agatha said grimly. We're not letting this rattle us, and we're certainly not letting Bill think we're helpless. You did scream when the mug broke. That was a battle cry. Charles's grin softened some of the tension. What now, General Raisin? Agatha paced, stirring flour with her slippers. Now we fight back. Whoever took that notebook is desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. We need to look them in the eye. Whom exactly do you plan to glare at first? Everyone. Efficient, Charles murmured. Agatha ignored him. The disinfectant clue nagged at her. Bladen immediately sprang to mind with his council office smell and fussy clipboard, but he had begun to feel too obvious, almost theatrically convenient. There were hospital staff connected to Pauline's past. There were crew members from Dacre's TV team who used industrial equipment. There were other officials drifting around Mercester's bureaucratic maze. Someone had walked boldly into her cottage and stolen the most damning evidence in the case. Not for sentimental reasons, not for panic, for survival. She felt another pulse of anger. I'm not letting them control this narrative. Oh dear, Charles said lightly. You're about to take charge. Should I be frightened? Yes. She cleared the table with brisk swipes, ignoring the flour cloud rising like smoke. Then she marched to the phone. Charles arched an eyebrow. Who are you calling? No one yet. She replaced the receiver. I'm thinking. That sounds dangerous. Agatha spun to face him. We need a setting where people will talk, where they can't escape easily, where there's cake on the table, and where I can smile sweetly while interrogating them. Charles considered this. The stocks in Lower Castley Green? The W.I. Hall, she said triumphantly. We'll hold a special emergency meeting, a community discussion, a crisis of morale, something vague and terrifying. Doris will love it. Charles beamed. Even better, you'll gather all 3 suspects under one roof. 3.5, Agatha corrected. I'm not ruling out Pauline's involvement. She's too timid by half, and timid people sometimes snap spectacularly. Oh, I do hope so, Charles said, delighted. Agatha glared. Not that kind of snap. She looked around the ruined kitchen again. Rage warmed her better than the broken boiler ever had. Whoever had violated her cottage had made a serious miscalculation. They had awakened not just Agatha Raisin the gossip, or Agatha Raisin the amateur sleuth, but Agatha Raisin, the woman who refused to be frightened in her own home. She lifted Hodge, who tolerated it for 3 seconds before wriggling down again. "You'll guard the house tomorrow," she told him. "Scratch anyone suspicious." Hodge stretched, unimpressed. Charles gathered the remaining unbroken mugs. "Shall I stay up in case our burglar returns?" "Don't be ridiculous," Agatha said. Then softer. "Yes, that might be wise." They made a final cup of tea, the cottage quieter now. Outside, preferably behind glass. Henry Crisp's wife, Linda, raised a tentative hand. Henry was very frightened after that tasting evening, said Mr. Dacres was planning to ruin the pub unless Henry paid for his new programme. Poor man hardly slept for 2 nights. Martin Bladen shifted, looking as though he wanted to disapprove but wasn't brave enough. Fiona patted his arm in a superior way that made Agatha's lip curl. "Martin had his own worries," Fiona said sweetly. "All that unpleasant talk about old accusations. It would have been dreadful if it resurfaced." Martin bristled. "It was a misunderstanding." "Of course it was," Fiona replied, though her tone suggested more certainty about gravity than innocence. Agatha seized the moment. "Speaking of misunderstandings, Gertie, you mentioned earlier you'd changed your dessert recipe at the last minute." Gertie pursed her lips. "Yes, someone pinched my nuts." Gasps fluttered around the hall. Gertie raised a hand. "For my crumble. I planned to include almonds, but the jar had been moved and partly emptied. I thought I was losing my mind." Agatha felt Charles, leaning lazily against a pillar, perk up like a cat, hearing a tin. "Moved, you say?" "I always keep it in my left cupboard," Gertie said. "That morning it was on the right. Half the nuts gone." Linda Crisp leaned forward. "Henry ordered a bar snack mix last month. It went missing for 2 days in the shared larder." Martin cleared his throat. "People move things all the time. It hardly means—" "It means someone had access," Agatha cut in, "and someone knew exactly where nuts were stored." Pauline spoke suddenly, her voice soft but steady. I saw Felicity and Mr. Dacres near the church the week before the competition." Everyone swiveled towards her. Pauline flushed. "They were arguing. She gave him an envelope. He smiled, but not nicely." Felicity's poise cracked for a heartbeat. Then she recovered. "It was a settlement of sorts. My old business. Nothing sinister." Charles murmured. "Everything with envelopes is sinister," earning a glare from Agatha. Agatha turned back to Felicity. "Did he threaten you?" "He threatened everyone," Felicity said calmly. "Leonard delighted in leverage." Gertie nodded vigorously. "He once told me my scones tasted like remorse." "That sounds personal," Charles said. "He made everything personal," Felicity answered. "I was merely trying to limit the damage." Mrs. Bloxby stepped in gently. "We must be careful not to speculate unfairly." Agatha smiled tightly. "Speculation is exactly what a memorial cookbook requires. Accuracy of flavour, accuracy of recollection." She tapped her notes. "Let's discuss who had access to the WI stores during the competition." Martin swallowed. "I inspected the kitchen as part of standard procedure." "And how long were you in there?" Agatha asked. 5 minutes. 10, perhaps. "Long enough to open jars," Charles suggested. Martin's ears reddened. "I would never tamper with ingredients." "Of course not," Agatha said. "But you knew about the allergy." "It is common knowledge among professionals," Martin said stiffly, and Mr. Dacres mentioned it loudly. Linda Crisp interjected. "Henry said Mr. Dacres made a joke about dying of biscuits. Henry thought it was in poor taste." "Everything he did was in poor taste," Gertie muttered. Agatha cleared her throat. Time for the next stir of the pot. "Pauline, you also had reason to be near the desserts that evening." Pauline blinked. "Only to avoid them. I can't go near nuts. I kept my distance." Fiona observed. "But you moved past the table when you fetched extra chairs." "Chairs don't require nuts," Pauline said sharply, surprising them all. Agatha hid a small smirk. "Good girl," she murmured. She took a moment to scan their faces. Felicity too smooth, Martin too defensive, Linda too anxious, Pauline too earnest, Gertie too indignant. Each had motive, each had proximity, Each had secrets, and someone had scaled her garden wall. "I propose," Agatha said, rising to full dramatic height, "a little tasting session at the vicarage tomorrow." A collective ripple moved through the hall. "We will test recipes for the cookbook. Felicity, Henry, Martin, Pauline, you will attend, as will Mrs. Blocksby, Charles and myself." Martin straightened. "Is this authorized?" "By me," Agatha said. Felicity's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly will we be tasting?" "Oh, nothing with nuts," Agatha said sweetly. "We wouldn't want another scandal." Charles stretched like a contented cat. "Agatha as hostess usually means someone ends up confessing," he said. Agatha ignored him. "This meeting is adjourned." As chairs scraped and villagers gathered coats, Mrs. Blocksby approached her. "Agatha, are you sure this is wise?" "Of course not," Agatha said, "but it's necessary." Mrs. Blocksby squeezed her hand. "You're doing good work, even if it frightens you." "It doesn't frighten me," Agatha lied. "I merely dislike intruders, chaos, and murderous bakers." "Understandable," Mrs. Blocksby said kindly. Charles held the door for her. "You looked positively regal today." "I was in command," Agatha said. "You were dangerous," Charles corrected. "And splendid." She allowed herself the smallest smile. Later, in her quiet cottage, the kettle sighed into life. Hodge padded in, tail high, giving an imperious meow as though demanding a full report. Agatha bent to scratch his head. "Don't worry," she murmured. "Tomorrow we'll finally stir up the truth." Hodge blinked, stretched luxuriously, and claimed the warm spot beside the stove, perfectly content in the aftermath of her chaos. "Don't touch anything," Agatha snapped, batting Charles's hand away from a custard jug. She had spent the last hour arranging the vicarage kitchen with the solemnity of a general preparing a battlefield. The modest trifles were lined up like obedient soldiers, each labelled in her neatest, most intimidating handwriting. Mrs. Blocksby, hovering at the doorway with a look of long-suffering patience, murmured something about Christian charity, though her eyes suggested she expected revelations, not recipes. Charles, annoyingly fresh after a night in her guest room, lounged against the counter. "You're in one of your moods, Aggie, always a promising sign." "Save your charm," she said. "You'll need it when someone bursts into tears." Bill Wong arrived early, slipping through the side door with quiet purpose. His expression conveyed both resignation and weary affection. Without a word, he moved straight to the pantry, notebook in hand. Mrs. Blocksby shut the door behind him as gently as one might close a nursery, though Bill was hardly childlike. "He promised not to interfere," she whispered. "He promised nothing of the sort," Agatha replied, tightening an apron she had no intention of using. "But he will hear everything." The first guests trickled in. Felicity glided through the doorway with a gracious smile so thin it trembled. Her sleek coat matched her sleek expression, both polished to perfection. Close behind her came Henry's wife, Linda, who carried the anxious dignity of someone representing a man already terrified of police suspicion. Martin Bladen followed, stiff and self-important. His fiancée, Fiona, prim and narrow-eyed as ever, clutched his arm like an injunction. Pauline arrived last, quiet and apologetic, as though afraid to disturb the air. Agatha clapped her hands with false brightness. "Thank you all for coming to this, informal tasting." A few eyebrows twitched. Everyone knew Agatha Raisin did nothing informally. "We're here," she continued, "to consider whether Castley might contribute recipes to a charitable cookbook in honour of the late Leonard Dacres." Linda's lips tightened. Felicity gave a tiny, disdainful lift of her chin. Bladen pretended to nod solemnly, though he looked ready to bolt. Agatha poured tea with fierce hospitality. "Let's begin with memories of Dacre's visit. It may help us choose the right tone for our tribute." "Toxic," muttered Gertie Pym, who had slipped in uninvited. "There's your tone." Agatha pretended not to hear. Instead, she produced a few scribbled pages from her handbag, hurried notes she'd copied from Dacre's notebook before it was stolen. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Yes," Agatha said, "the notebook, the one that vanished from my kitchen. These are my notes." She opened her scribbled pages with theatrical delicacy. "Mr. Dacres kept accounts and comments," Charles murmured. "Nasty little things, like the man himself." Agatha began reading from her notes. Felicity's name appeared twice, once under her current identity, again under the former business name that had vanished from London guides after Dacre's reviews. Figures beside her name suggested regular payments. Felicity's smile flickered dangerously. Then Henry's name. "Threatened investment," Agatha recited, watching Linda, "and a note about a proposed gastro-pub deal." Linda coloured, her indignation fighting with fear. Then Bladen. His initials were followed by "Report 1998, copies X3. Bladen's face mottled. His fiancée glared at him with dawning horror. Finally, Gertie Pym. "Old Queen of Cakes hiding little secret. Sea sale." Gertie looked outraged. "I hide nothing," she snapped, "except my best scone recipe, and that's my right." "And Pauline." Agatha hesitated, softening for once. "A cryptic line about an inheritance fuss." Pauline flushed. "It's nothing. A family disagreement. He invited himself to hear it." Agatha closed the notebook. "He collected vulnerabilities. It seems he expected payment from several of you." Felicity lifted her chin. "That doesn't mean—" "I'm not accusing you," Agatha lied smoothly. "Not yet." Charles coughed to hide his amusement. "Let's go over the timeline," Agatha continued. "From the WI competition to the vicarage supper. Access to the trifle is everything." Linda spoke up first. "Henry never went near the vicarage kitchen. He was angry after that tasting evening, yes, but he stayed at the pub. Ask anyone." "I have," Agatha said, "and they agree. So Henry is unlikely." She turned to Bladen. "You left the WI hall with Dacres immediately after the competition. Phone records show you were on a council call during the crucial half hour before dessert at the vicarage." Bladen puffed out his chest. "Exactly. I am innocent." "In that specific window," Agatha corrected. "Yes, but you were in the WI kitchen earlier. You inspected ingredients. You moved jars." "For hygiene reasons." "Of course," Agatha said, tone smooth as sandpaper. She shifted to Gertie. "You're missing nuts. You said someone moved your jar before the competition." Gertie sniffed. "I thought someone was helping themselves. Crumble thieves." Agatha nodded slowly. "Yet those nuts reappeared in the WI cupboard after Dacre's death." An uncomfortable rustle passed through the room. "Now," Agatha said, pulling a magazine from her bag, "we come to Felicity." She placed the old trade magazine on the counter. A younger Felicity stared from the glossy page, standing beside Dacres outside her former London shop. Felicity inhaled sharply. "Inside," Agatha continued, "is the review that ruined your business, and notes about a near-fatal allergic episode he had at a restaurant where you worked under another name." Felicity's composure cracked. "You knew about his nut allergy long ago," Agatha said softly. "You knew how severe it was, and when you volunteered to tidy the vicarage kitchen, you had a few minutes alone, enough to modify one portion." "No," Felicity whispered. Martin's fiancée, Fiona, shook her head wildly. "He destroyed me. He mocked my work, extorted me, threatened more. I only wanted him to stop." Agatha said nothing. Felicity's voice rose. "He demanded money again. I gave him that envelope Pauline saw. He said he'd expose me anyway. He always wanted more. He would have ruined me a second time." Bladen's fiancée looked stricken. Linda pressed a hand to her throat. Pauline wiped tears. Felicity sagged onto a chair. "It was just a pinch. I thought he'd refuse dessert. He loved performing. He couldn't resist being dramatic. I thought—" She broke. At that moment, the pantry door opened. Bill stepped out, expression solemn. "Felicity Trent," he said gently, "I have to caution you." She closed her eyes and nodded. The room fell into a hush. Even Charles, usually glib, stood sombre. As Bill led Felicity away, Agatha felt something like pity, a woman driven by appearances, cornered by arrogance, and undone by desperation. Not so unlike herself, though Agatha's pride had never prompted murder. At least not yet, she thought grimly. Mrs. Bloxby laid a hand on Agatha's arm. "Come home, dear. The kettle will be waiting." And later, in her quiet kitchen, with Hodge stretching luxuriously across her lap, Agatha muttered, "All that fuss over a trifle," and switched on the kettle, letting its gentle sigh settle the night. Roy Silver's voice fizzed down the line before Agatha could say hello. "Darling, You've wasted a golden branding opportunity. A poisoned trifle. It's practically a franchise. Roy, Agatha said, if you utter the phrase murder dessert anthology, I'll hang up. He uttered it. She hung up. Carsley, weeks after the drama had slid back into its usual eccentric rhythm. The WI had passed a motion banning experimental trifles until further notice, which Gertie Pym announced with the solemnity of a coronation. Plain sponge was back in fashion. People said it calmed the nerves. The national press had found a fresher scandal, and Agatha's name no longer lurked in headlines, much to her relief and Roy's despair. Mrs. Blocksby arrived one afternoon with a gentle smile and a plate of shortbread. Hodge trotted behind her, smug from being admired. Bill may drop by later, she said. He has news. Agatha tried to look indifferent. The case is over. What more is there? Mrs. Blocksby poured tea. Sometimes endings need a quieter explanation. Bill appeared just as the kettle whistled. He stepped inside with that mild, apologetic air he used when bringing unwelcome truths. Felicity has confessed fully, he said. Her solicitor is arguing diminished responsibility, years of blackmail, emotional pressure. She'll avoid a sensational trial. Agatha folded her arms. Good. The last thing this village needs is tourists hunting murder locations. Bill smiled faintly. Bladen's resigned, quietly. Henry's pub is steady again. Gertie's returned to ruling the WI cake table, but with marginally softer edges. Mrs. Blocksby says Carsley has been spared another sort of slow poisoning. Agatha snorted. She would say that. Mrs. Blocksby only smiled. There was a long moment where the steam curled from the tea, and Agatha felt a strange tug in her chest. Vanity had led her straight into humiliation, gossip, and suspicion. But that same vanity, or determination depending on who described it, had pushed her to dig deeper than any official inquiry expected. I suppose, she said lightly, I wasn't entirely useless. You saw details others didn't, Bill replied. You often do. The compliment landed harder than he intended. Agatha looked away, pretending to rearrange the shortbread. Someone had to protect my reputation, she muttered. A knock sounded. Charles Fraith sauntered in, hands in pockets, expression far too pleased. I hear you've been exonerated, Aggie. Shame. I had money on you. Do shut up, Charles, he leaned against the table. I thought I might whisk you away, somewhere with sunshine, and absolutely no trifles. Agatha's heart gave a small, traitorous flutter. Don't be absurd, I'm busy. With what? Terrifying Henry's customers into eating plain sponge? She glared, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Mrs. Blocksby hid a smile behind her cup. Charles continued, Of course, if you prefer to stay home and admire your reputation, I'll leave you to it. I don't need you rescuing me, Agatha said. I handled this case perfectly well. He bowed, as you always do. Bill cleared his throat. I should get back. He gave Agatha a kind nod. Try to rest. After they left, Mrs. Blocksby tidied her saucer. You know, she said gently, vanity is sometimes a form of bravery. It pushes people to act. I'd rather be admired without having to nearly kill someone first, Agatha replied. You didn't kill anyone, dear. No, Agatha said softly. But Felicity's life collapsed because she thought the world judged her baking more than her being, and I understand that more than I'd like. Mrs. Blocksby laid a warm hand on her arm. Attention to detail is a gift. You use it to help people whether you realize it or not. Agatha sniffed. I use it to stop idiots from thinking I'm a fool. That too, Mrs. Blocksby conceded gently. Evening drifted in, quiet and mild. Mrs. Blocksby departed with a last kind smile, leaving Agatha alone in the soft kitchen light. Hodge stretched luxuriously across a chair, flicking his tail with the arrogance of a creature who had never doubted his importance. A sponge finger, the remnant of a perfectly ordinary pudding, lay temptingly close to his paw. Don't you dare, Agatha warned. Hodge batted it anyway. Agatha sighed, then almost laughed. Fine, you win. She opened the back door for a breath of cooler air. The world outside felt calm, balanced again, as though Carsley itself had shaken off the poison of secrets. She reached for a cigarette, lit it, and watched the smoke curl into the gentle dusk. One cigarette, not a ritual, just a punctuation mark at the end of weeks of turmoil. Carsley, ridiculous and dear, settled around her like a shawl. She wondered what absurdity Roy would drag her into next. Marmalade, perhaps, or puddings. There was always another mystery lurking behind someone's garden wall. Hodge hopped into her lap, warm and content. Agatha stroked his fur, feeling her restlessness twitch like his tail before a pounce. The case was over, order restored, but her curiosity was awake again, sharp and hungry. "Onward, then," she murmured, and the village, in its quiet way, agreed.